screen. Okay, can you see my screen? Is it visible? My screen? You can hear me, and is it visible? Okay, great. So we have been studying specialized cloud mechanisms so far. So quickly, let's look at all the mechanisms. It's specialized, right? It is one level up, which uses all the infrastructure mechanism. Over that, the specialized cloud mechanisms work. Better than this, this one. What I wanted to see was this, right? So this is a very high level of the mechanisms, right? At the right bottom of the layer, actually we have cloud infrastructure mechanism at the right bottom. So we have network, servers, storage, usage monitor, resource replication, ready-made environment. And cloud security mechanism is there in all the three, right? Like it's there in the infrastructure security, it is there, and all the softwares that are used in cloud management security is there at that level, and it's basically security is everywhere. So that's one thing that is required because everything is hardware and software. So even if it means a browser, there's a security. Even if it's a browser that you're using to access a cloud service, the security is required at that level also. And we went through all the techniques of security during our security mechanisms. See, now the other two layers, specialized cloud mechanism builds on the top of the infrastructure. Okay, so the management builds over the specialized cloud mechanism. So that is the structure, right? This is the structure we have seen. So all the mechanisms, so at the right bottom we have cloud infrastructure, specialized cloud mechanisms on the top of it, and on the top of it we have some management software. So you can think of this as your, if you have accessed AWS console, then this is like one of your consoles, okay, which through which the cloud consumer enters in. And underlying there are a lot of softwares which are specialized to do something. It may be mean to doing load balancing or auto scaling or creating a machine, hundreds of things, right? And at the right bottom we are actually playing with all the infrastructure. We're playing with machines, storages, networks, processors, right? That's what it would mean. And security is applied all over the place. So right now we are into specialized cloud mechanisms. So we have finished until failover system. So we finished automated scaling listener, which is listening for the needs of the scaling requirement, right? I need more machines of the same type. I need more websites of the same type. So we need to scale it. Your container technologies are also, something that is used to scale, right? Say at the software level, if you want to scale, or at the infrastructure level you want to scale, virtual machines is one. The other technology that is used is containers, right? Then you have load balancers if you want to balance the load. Then you have a SLA monitor, right? Which will look into So the SLA monitor would be looking into the service level agreements, right? Whether we are meeting a particular service level. Then pay per use monitor is looking into the billing part, right? How much are we using? Audit monitor is basically the regulations, right? We have to keep a track of all records. Okay, it is a recording software. So and that data that is recorded is when it will be utilized when there is some, let's say maybe every 6 months is an audit, right? Sometimes like a accountant, you create all these accounts and then you have to audit it with the CA, right? So the CA will look into all your journal entries. Okay, how many credits were there, how many debits were there. So in the same way, audits who entered in, who entered out, who went out, which person used what services, and we try. So we have to keep a track of everything. So for example, in the COVID situation, right? What is the government trying to do? Everywhere you go, they track your phone number and wherever we are visiting, right? Using that app, Arogya Setu. It is a kind of a tracking information, but also it becomes like an audit information. Tomorrow, if something goes wrong, also this audit information will be very useful. And then we did a failover system, and in this failover system we had two types, right? Active and active passive, where failover system is used so that the system never fails. If one goes down, the second one is up, and that is what this specialized cloud mechanisms are used for. So when we say mechanisms, they are ultimately softwares. Okay, so basically somebody has written some simple program to do this particular task. Even you can write a Java program to do a automated scaling. Basically you will be writing a Java program and listening to the resource requirements. If anybody wants a machine, you simply call the increase the machine function or something. So it's very logical and it's very straightforward from that perspective. So now we'll be continuing forward with the hypervisor and the REST4, and let's see if we can complete this cloud management also. So that is where we are. Okay, so failover is done, and now we are into hypervisor. So by now, everybody has heard the term hypervisor, right? Hypervisor is a software that controls what? Virtual machines. So a virtual box, if you install Oracle VirtualBox, then you are creating a virtual machine inside that. So Oracle VirtualBox becomes your hypervisor. And the other examples of hypervisors are like VMware, Zen, then we have Hyper-V, right? So maybe I'll show you something. So this is basically a Windows operating system, right? Now when I click on this, let me type Ubuntu. Now where did I get this app from? I got this actually from Microsoft Store. Okay, so I went over here. So so Microsoft Store gives you the Ubuntu operating system, and if you go in here in the Microsoft Store, you can actually take it and install it as if you're installing any other app. Just like you install mobile app, Microsoft Store gives you a Ubuntu app, a full operating system, even though Windows itself is an operating system. And I don't know why it's taking time. What is this trying to search? Hold on. Okay, so let's see if Ubuntu comes up. I do not know. Search. That is Okay, some issue. I don't know why it's okay. Great. So you see, you have all these operating systems, and it says Ubuntu is already installed. It's like any other app that usually you have apps in mobiles, but you have apps in Microsoft stores also, and you can get all kinds of apps over here. So Ubuntu is what I installed. Okay. So let's once I install, it will be like any other software, and that is what you're seeing over here. And when I click, what happens? What you're getting is an operating system with a proper simulation of the. It's not a simulation, by the way. It's an actual operating system. So if I put in the commands, okay, haven't I created anything on this? Maybe not. Nothing is there. Oops. Why am I spelling? Clear cd dot dot cd dot dot. So I'm going one folder back, right? ls cd dot dot cd dot dot ls. Okay, you see all the folders are there just like you are having in Unix or Ubuntu. So now the thing is, if you want to work with Ubuntu, Microsoft gives you a way, but the question is how this is achievable. So anyone has any ideas how it is achievable? So this is how your machine looks like, right? So this is your laptop, let's say. On the top of this, your Windows operating system was installed. So I had Windows 10, so Windows 10 is running over here, right? This is what you're using. Then I installed an app, Ubuntu on the top of this. So basically, I had Ubuntu, and it was installed in Windows 10, and Windows 10 was installed in a laptop. So the question is how Ubuntu, an entire operating system. Now just because this operating system is installed, it does not mean it has access to all the machines. Huh? It has all the access to all these folders. It has its own file system, and all the whatever files is there inside Ubuntu is not shared with the Windows. Neither whatever files is in Windows is not shared over here. That both exist happily, but they don't interfere with each other. That is so important from the security perspective. So you can create so this is possible because of Windows 10. If you consider, okay, this is entire Windows 10, then Windows 10 has a piece called as a hypervisor over here. And what is that hypervisor called? Can anyone guess what is the hypervisor of Microsoft? Question. Which hypervisor does Microsoft use? Okay. No answers. Any guess which hypervisor does Microsoft use? We have heard about so many hypervisors, right? VMware, Zen, Hyper-V. So Hyper-V is a Microsoft product. This is where the magic happens. Hyper-V is, now you can install Hyper-V maybe separately, but it comes integrated as part of operating system. This fellow is becoming a bridge, so maybe the right diagram would be Hyper-V. It is running within the Hyper-V hypervisor. the very word, there's a hypervisor, right? So this is a Microsoft hypervisor which is managing. So for Hyper-V, this is like a virtual machine. It is telling it's an app, but for you it looks like an app, but for hypervisor this is a virtual machine, and it will have all the control mechanisms, as and any hypervisor would have a control over VM. So, and this is how it runs because of Hyper-V. If you have an operating system which does not support Hyper-V, then it cannot support Ubuntu, and that is how it does. So that is what hypervisors are for, right? Hypervisors enable you to create machines on a machine. So it may be over a physical machine, or it may be an operating system inside an operating system. It was like two layers inside. Ideally we would, or it could be like there's no operating system at all. Hypervisor is directly installed over the bare metal. Bare metal means directly over the laptop, and there's no operating system. Hypervisor itself is a operating system, and what that hypervisor operating system can do, it can create as many machines as you want. So hypervisor mechanism is a fundamental part of virtualization infrastructure that is primarily used to generate virtual server instances of a physical server. The hypervisor is generally limited to one physical server and can therefore create virtual images of that server. Now this point is very important. So what does this mean? So I gave you an example of a physical machine which is like your laptop, right? So this is a physical machine which is, let's say, your laptop. Now as I told you, hypervisor type 1 can be installed directly over physical machine without the need for operating system. So let's say hypervisor type 1 is here. Now this hypervisor can create machines. So it can create machines, right? So let us indicate the virtual machines over here. 1, let's say it can create 2, 3. So a normal machine in a cloud is much more powerful than your normal laptop. Okay, your laptop may be able to create 2 machines max, but a machine in the cloud can create probably 20s and 50s virtual machines. So it's a lot more powerful. Okay, so this hypervisor is a manager, like is managing the virtual machines. So how many virtual machines we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there is VM1, and then it goes up to VM6. So just like this hypervisor is there, this machine is there, there might be another machine also, right? Similar configuration, and let's depict this in purple. VM1. So there are 3, let's say 2 virtual machines running over here. Now this hypervisor can only manage its boundaries only. This hypervisor's boundary is only this much, okay, and this hypervisor's boundary is only this much, means he this hypervisor is a manager of the virtual machines running on this physical machine. This hypervisor cannot take control over the physical machine or the hypervisor or the VMs. That is not possible. Okay, so these VMs cannot be touched by anyone without the hypervisors. Directly you cannot touch this hypervisor unless there is a network connection created by VM. You can access it, of course, but hypervisor is still the manager. He is watching out for all the VMs running on that physical machine. Hypervisor on physical machine 1 does not manage hypervisor or virtual machine of physical machine or even the physical machine on machine 2. So this is very important to know. If I want to create even a cluster of 2 machines, let's say I want to create a cluster of these 2 machines. Cluster is like grouping, okay? Cluster of these 2 machines. Who can do that? This hypervisor can do that, and he can create a cluster of VM machines only for the virtual machines that are running on his control. If the other hypervisor you cannot do like this. This kind of configuration is not possible where you have a virtual machine in some other physical machine running, and there's another virtual machine running on another box. This cannot be done by hypervisors. So for this we have something known as virtual infrastructure management. So for this we require a separate virtual infrastructure management software, and we have spoken about this a little bit in our previous lectures. So this fellow is managing whom? This fellow is virtual infrastructure management is supposed to manage the hypervisors. So for this virtual infrastructure management, when it wants to see where it wants to see all the virtual machines, what for this virtual infrastructure management can see all the virtual machines. This hypervisor can see only VM1 to VM6. This hypervisor on the right hand side can see VM7 and VM8. It does not know there is a VM1 to VM6 on the other side. So virtual infrastructure management is like a manager of hypervisors. Hypervisor is the manager of VMs. So for this virtual infrastructure management, logically it can see, not directly but definitely logically, it can see all virtual machines, right? It can see virtual machine 1, 2, 3. This is just a logical representation. The actual virtual machine is can be viewed and managed by hypervisor. 4, 5, 6. So 6 virtual machines on this side. Plus it can see even this, because this virtual infrastructure management can call a function on hypervisor and say, oh, please tell me which all virtual machines you have. That is possible, right? That is a simple function call and you will get the list of all the details. So logically, virtual infrastructure management logically, this virtual infrastructure management can see all of this as one layer. So virtual infrastructure management can logically connect these two if need be, logically, okay? So not at the logically group them, you can say. did a logical group, but they cannot be if both of them have to be communicated, then definitely this virtual infrastructure management will have to talk to hypervisor 1 and hypervisor 2. That is the job of virtual infrastructure management. In case if there is any work on this machine and this machine, it has to speak to the appropriate hypervisors. Now there are situations when this box is loaded with too many virtual machines and this has to be shifted over here. But let's say on this machine what all was installed, Java was installed and I wrote my program. Now if I want to shift, does this mean I have to reinstall everything over here? So ideally this Java my program is nothing but a file. Okay, that is how virtual machines are, right? They are files. So it is file. So let's say this is file flat, virtual. Actually this is called virtual machine image file, right? This file contains what? This file contains Java plus it contains my program. So this file, where it is stored ideally on a machine, right? It is ultimately stored on a storage device, right? So you might have a storage device in between. So let's say there is a storage device over here. All the in fact all the files you can have a separate storage to store. The hypervisor can control the virtual machine image, but where it stores, that can be common, right? That can be a common place. Storage can be shared between physical machines. The moment you do this, you open up the door to do every kind of possibilities. Now this is just a file. If hypervisor, let me just okay, so this storage is shared with whom? With all the hypervisors, and virtual infrastructure management wants to take this virtual machine from here, this image, wherever it is here, right, this piece. It wants to, let's say there's too much of load, there's 6 virtual machines over here. So what it would mean is virtual infrastructure management will simply tell hypervisor type 1, please stop running this virtual machine. That is as simple command as it will be. The moment it starts stopping it, the machine will stop and disappear from here, and this will be stored in this image file. Then it's all the matter of this virtual infrastructure management takes this file and tells hypervisor to take this image file, whatever is running on this, please run it on your box now, and this fellow gets shifted over here. So this kind of for the user who is using Java program, whoever is using this machine, this is very seamless. That user will never come to know that his hypervisors have changed, and because hypervisors have changed, the physical machine is also changed. So there has been a migration. This is called a live migration. Live migration means while the user is still using the software, he was online, and in the background this magic was done of shifting the virtual machine from one box to the other box. So for the user, because when we create virtual machines on the cloud, we never know on which box the virtual machine is running. We even do not know whether our virtual machine is in live migration stage right now. So we are constantly being migrated, and in the same way, to balance the load, it is quite possible that we take another machine and we shift it to another box. So now the load is equal, and so there's a constant monitoring of the performance. We may constantly monitoring how the the hypervisors are performing, how the physical machine is performing, how much load is there on every box, and this kind of playing around with this kind of resources at a higher level is done by virtual infrastructure management. So a hypervisor is generally limited to one physical server and can therefore create virtual images of that server only. Similarly, a hypervisor can assign virtual servers it generates to resource pools. So what is that resource pool? The resource pool is what that virtual infrastructure management was doing. It created a pool of all virtual machine, a logical pool of virtual machines. Once you this is a pool, right? It's like a swimming pool. This is a swimming pool. How many people can swim in it? So this is like your example of resource pool. Just like there's a swimming pool, there's a resource pool. In this resource pool, what type of resources are there? It's a pool of all virtual machines where they can come and swim around over here, and who can tell who can kind of give instructions. So virtual infrastructure management is like that, your pool manager, right, who is looking after this pool, whether enough proper, if he wants to do any shifting, he knows how to do the shifting and everything. And if he wants to assign any user, so this user, if I want to create a cluster, like let's say there's a load balancer, and this load balancer wants to balance the load with a cluster of two computers. This logical group will be assigned to the load balancer. But in reality, where this these virtual machines are running, they are running on two different physical machines. Do I even know about it? No. For me, for the load balancer, these two machines, I have to balance my load between these two machines. So that is how it is managed. So resource pooling is very important in whenever you want to get any work done in the world anywhere. You have to see how many resources you have. Let's say you want to go on a you're going to there's a war, right? So how many army soldiers do I have? How many navy I have? We have to always look into that pool. That's a pool of resources, and then you can manage it at a very high level. We don't see this soldier is a part of this regiment, that soldier is part of that regiment. No, for us both the soldiers are part of our team, something like that. So hypervisor has limited virtual server management features such as increasing the virtual server capacity or shutting it down. Means hypervisor can do only this much, that manage the virtual machine, tell it to shut it down, tell it if somebody requests to shut it down, then it will shut it down. If you want to increase the storage space for the virtual machine, it can do that. It can only manage the resource which is there in its control. So this is an example of a VIM, virtual infrastructure management, and if you see the lines, this hypervisor is running on this the physical machine. The bottom layer is all the physical server, the middle layer is all the virtualization platform. On this platform your actual virtual machines are running. So there are 4 virtual machines managed by hypervisor 1, there are 3 managed by hypervisor 2, and there are the third hypervisor managing 2. But where is this hypervisor running? This hypervisor is running on box number 3, 2 and 1. And who is managing all 3? VIM. Hypervisor software can be installed directly on bare metal servers. So that is what I have already mentioned about, right? Hypervisor type 1. Hypervisor provides features for controlling, sharing and scheduling the usage of hardware resources. It can manage the processor on the machines, power, the processor power, the memory use, the input output speed. And then we spoke about how the storage space, this is a shared storage between two physical servers. So on this machine, that this it says it's a busy physical server, means there's a load, too much of load over here. And so what can be done? This shared storage can, it's a matter of shifting the virtual machine image file from here to here. It's a matter of just shifting it over here, that file, and that file can be started in this hypervisor. So that is what has been happened over here. You stop over here because this both these hypervisors are sharing the same storage. If you're not sharing the same storage, then it's a problem. So sharing a storage is very important. Only when you share the storage between different hypervisors, you can play around more smoothly. So here one of the machine is shifted to over here, and then the hypervisor is told to start the machine automatically and programmatically. So that was all about hypervisors. And now we move into next mechanism, which is resource cluster. So already I spoke to you about resource cluster, right? So this is like a logical grouping, which is a cluster is like a, it's not always, cluster is not always logical grouping, you can say. Cluster is physical grouping, so this won't be right. This could be a cluster, a virtual machine cluster. This is one cluster, this is cluster 1. In the same way, the machines on this box, even though this is shifted over here, this could be one cluster. So clusters are usually close to each other, they cannot be at a distance apart, because only if they are in the same place, you can increase the you can manage the cluster. So why would you use cluster? You can do we use clusters for something like parallel computing, right? If you want to manage, so parallel computing, you cannot have this machine running in India and other machine running in Africa, right? So you cannot create a cluster. That kind of cluster doesn't make sense. You have all the machines in one place, make a cluster out of it using clustering platforms, and you can use the power of the cluster. Then this cluster is powerful, has the power of 4 machines. So you increase the performance of a of any application using cluster technology. So whenever you see these dotted lines, it means now in this case the 3 lines in the 3 machines, these are physical machines, okay? So I hope you all are distinguishing between a physical machine and virtual machine. This on the top is what you're seeing, a virtual machine, the color of it, it's a dotted line. It's a dotted line, and here it is like a bold and dark. It means it's a actual physical machine. So when you see this dotted line, it means these 3 machines are part of the same cluster. They are in a their cluster, and they are close to each other. So this mechanism is also used, right, to increase the performance. So let's read this. They can be logically combined into groups to improve their allocation and use. So ideally they are very close to each other, but in some cases you can create logical groupings of the cluster across location also. It is location wise also it may be possible, but it is not recommended for certain type of use cases, right? One use case is parallel computing. If you want to do parallel computing, you cannot make sure your cluster is in one place. The resource cluster mechanism is used to group multiple IT resource instances so that they can be operated as a single IT resource. This increases the combined computing capacity, load balancing, and availability of the cluster IT resources. So the moment you put a cluster, you can do load balancing with it. You can create a failover system, right? A failover system also can be a cluster, where one machine is active and the other machine is passive, and they're part of the same cluster. So the cluster, you can tell the cluster software that if one goes down, you bring the other one up. A cluster management platform that is running as a distributed middleware in all of the cluster nodes is usually responsible for these activities. So what does this mean? So let's say I have one virtual machine here, another virtual machine here, and the third virtual machine here. So if I want to create a cluster of this, okay, I want to create a cluster of 3 machines into one. So what is the way I can do it? The way it is done is you have a software called something like over here, which is called cluster management software. Or you can say a platform. So just like you installing Java, you are installing a cluster management software. Right, and now this software, the same software is installed here and is installed here. Now this software is not is not an individual software. It doesn't make sense, right? They are working like a team actually. With whom? With the other cluster management softwares which are part of the same cluster. They are working like a team. So this fellow is telling, you see, I am managing this machine over here. If you need any work, then you connect with me. So there's a network between this fellow, and this fellow. They are all working together like a team. So if any request is coming through from outside to create a story, so to run run a program. So which one should where it should run this cluster management software? Everyone will this cluster management software they will be registered as a team, and if the message comes to this first fellow, he will say that, oh no, I am very loaded, can you take part? He'll tell the other teammate, can you go ahead and manage this part for me. So in that case there is a resource has been resource shifting or resource allocation has been happening, where that resource should be running. So that discussion is done between all these cluster management software which are running on all the machines, and they are communicating with each other to simulate as if this is one machine. For this fellow outsider, this whole thing is like one machine, but actually there are 3 machines running over here, and the cluster management platform software is kind of making you feel as if there's only one machine, but internally it manages the entire show with the help of 3 machines. So clustering is very important. Okay, so so we see different types of clusters. We see server cluster, right? That is what we seen just now. We are clustering servers, and there is we can cluster databases and data sets also. So let's also, this is resource server cluster. So what is a database cluster? So database cluster is mainly used for availability. So the question is, what is availability means, right? So far we have seen your failover system is a availability system actually. So what happens in a failover system? Failover system, we have a, let's say we have a active passive environment. Okay, so this is in India. This machine is running in India, and this machine is running in India, and this machine is running. A passive one is somewhere in Africa, let's say. So let's say these are clusters. Now you already got an idea, right, how clusters management softwares are managing clusters. So these two fellows are there. So definitely if they are part of the cluster, then the cluster management platform software also is managing them, right? So this is a cluster. Now they are geographically diverse, and one is active and the other one is passive. Means now if something happens to the active, the second one will be available, and that is what availability means. So you can have a database failover system also. It does not mean machine. Database is nothing. So database is here. So I have my database 1 over here. I will create a replica of this database over here. So it's the same database. I create a replica. So every time there is some operation happening, like somebody is telling create a record, read a record, update a record, delete a record. The record is created over here, right, in this database over here. But whenever this database is created, it has to be synced. It is like your files are getting synced with the cloud, right, sometimes. So this database, because tomorrow if something happens to this fellow has to be ready with all the same data, right? So syncing is constantly important. You cannot sync in the last minute when something has happened to the machine. So when this fellow is syncing, this fellow also will look like this only, so that tomorrow this passive database has to become active, then it will become active. So now in cloud there are not only two levels of passives. It depends on the services that you're using. Some services have 3 levels, or even 6 levels. But syncing takes time, okay? And I mentioned the word called in one of our lecture. How does it spell? I forgot. Okay, syncing, I think the spelling is wrong, but syncing takes time, right? Few seconds it will take for this syncing process to. It's like you have let's say hundreds of files on your mobile, and you want to create a backup copy of it on your drive. That it will take few seconds, okay, to do it. But once it is there, then if something happens to your mobile, that backup is there. So that is what the failover system means. It is available at all the time. So the time taken to sync this fellow may take 1 second, then the time taken to this will be 1 second, more than 1 second, right? It will be maybe 2 seconds. So this what cloud is what the cloud providers will say, we provide this database availability service, but if suddenly you're connecting, let's say you are connecting to this first database, and now you want to connect to the database in Africa suddenly, because there are African users, you want to make this active. So it is not necessary that all the data has been synced when you accessed it. It will be synced eventually. Maybe only half the copy has been synced over here. There is still some syncing to be done over here. So this process is called eventual syncing, eventual consistency. I had explained this concept, right? That it takes time for the syncing process to happen, and it's called eventually it will sync up, but not immediately. That is what it means. So the service will come, the data cloud provider will say, okay, I'm giving you this service, but this is the condition. Just remember, it is eventually consistent. If you don't find your data, don't complain, just wait for it, and eventually it will be synced, and then you will see the data. So that is what database clustering would do. And large data set cluster, we have seen examples of how do we break data. We did parallel data problems, right, where we had a large data set and we broke it down, but they were all part of the same data set. They were a cluster. So we wanted to add let's say a certain number on every record. So we can break the data and use parallel computing, and they are all one part of the one group. At the end we can combine the results of all the operations on the data, right? We had done this demo on Hadoop last semester. So that is what data set clustering would be done. So data partitioning, so we partition the data, means we are breaking down the data. So in order to manage a huge set of data set, we break up the data. But whenever we are breaking down the data, just make sure that data in one place is not dependent on the data in other place. Otherwise, breaking down them will not be, there will be no point in breaking them. So just maybe little example I'll give. Database cluster. So let's say you have data set, right? So data set contains a is equal to 1, b is equal to 2, and c is equal to 3, right? And now maybe you can you want to add 1 over here to each number. So let's say somewhere down the line there is x, y and z. Now if the operation is just you want to add +1 to everyone, then it is very easy, right? You take this, you make a cluster of this, this entire thing becomes your cluster, and you can make this you can break down this into, you can partition this basically, right? You can partition this into one data set and second data set. But are they part of the same group? Yes, they are part of the same group. So they are part of actually the same data set. So this is a data set cluster. And then we can take one of these data sets and assign it to machine 1. So this will run on virtual machine 1, and I will run the program to add 1 over here. This will become +1. So +1 operation will be carried out over here. Parallelly, I will do the same thing, right, with the other data set part of the other part, in which is like a partition in the same over here. So this I will assign it to machine 2, and again I will do the same operation. So partitioning is possible if this A, B and C are not dependent on X, Y, Z. If your formula was something like plus X plus A, let's say you want to add plus X plus A to every number, you cannot have X and A in a different data set, right? We do not know what X is, we do not know what A is. Such a thing will become too complex. There's no point in breaking up. If these two fellows are talking to each other, then what is the point of parallel computing? Then it will not run fast. It will become slower, because you have increased and you have actually added a network time now. So parallel computing won't work fast. We have done these examples even when we studied in SEM 3. So this is what it means, right? Each cluster node processes workloads without communicating with other nodes. Only then it makes sense. Many resource clusters require cluster nodes to have the almost identical. So what are nodes? Nodes are nothing but each machine, right? That becomes your cluster node. Your cluster is made up of nodes. Sometimes it is made up of databases, sometimes it is made up of data sets, and sometimes it is made up of machines. It depends on what type of cluster we are talking about. So what they are saying is, if you are creating 4 machines for me, make sure all the machines are having the same type. You cannot have one machine running like a horse and other machine running like an elephant. No, you either have 4 horses or 4 elephants. We should be of the same type. So in clustering at a high level, we have already seen what is a load balancing cluster, right? A load balancer can be assigned a cluster of servers, that is used to load balance. And we have seen an example of high availability cluster. When we looked at the database example, that was a high availability cluster example. So high availability cluster implements what? A failover system mechanism. We have already mentioned about that in case of when we were discussing the database example. It was a failover system. And failover systems are used to do what? They are used to provide availability. If something goes wrong in one, the other one is available. And that's how that kind of cluster is called high availability cluster. So what does this mean? This means these 2 machines are clustered, and similarly these 2 machines are clustered. So there are 4 clusters over here. These are server clusters over here, and these hypervisors are also clustered. Now how can hypervisors be clustered? It is not possible without the help of VIM. Okay, so VIM is a key software that is used to resource pool, right? It will pool all the hypervisors into one pool. And even at the machine level also we can cluster, right? Where Hadoop can distribute the load of data across 4 machines. So that kind of clustering is also possible. So then we come to this. We can where are we now? Multi-device broker. Still a lot of slides. Okay. We'll take a break now. Maybe we'll start now at first let me pause. So now we get to the next specialized cloud mechanism, which is like a multi-device broker. So when we access AWS, it is like a big cloud, right? Inside that, all your computers are there, and all your services are running inside it. But for us, this is like one different universe, right? That is how the public cloud is, for example. Now we kind of also spoke about the different deployment models, right? Deployment scenario. So we might have another cloud, right? Oh yeah, that is also possible. You may have multiple clouds actually. So this could be a private cloud, or this could be a public cloud, right? And then we have cloud consumers, right, over here. And this cloud consumers, some people are having desktops, right, a series of desktops. Some people are having a mobile, and there are all kind of varieties of devices with the cloud consumers, which is used to connect to the cloud. So cloud consumers, they go into the management console, and they deal with the cloud, the devices, right? This is a mobile. The first one is a desktop. So this is a desktop example. So we are not looking at one desktop, right? We are looking at thousands and thousands of desktops and mobiles, connecting to the cloud through a simple maybe a website. So that is one possibility, right? There is a interaction between the front end and the back end. But this is not always necessary, right? There can be so there might be a back end over here in this cloud, and there may be a back end over here in this cloud, which means services inside the cloud. So this backend also can talk to each other, right? Sometimes we are sharing storage, right? So let's say I have a storage over here, and there's a storage over here. Now this storage may be of a particular type 1, and this is the storage inside here may be of type 2. So we are dealing cross cloud communication, plus we are dealing with cross device communication. Yeah. So the question is how things are, with so much of varieties on, that we are, cloud is one, and it knows what it uses internally, but it deals with all this variety. So how does it manage, for a mobile, the data, usually when we look at videos in mobiles, the size of the mobile, maybe the size of the video will be a little bit different, the format will be different, the size of the video will be different. Only then you can stream video data on mobile, but on a desktop you're having a bigger resolution, a bigger image, a lot of frame rates. So the challenge for a desktop is different from a challenge for a mobile. In the same way, the backends, though they are dealing with storages, they may be dealing with different types, so. And this is where your cloud has its own, you can say, device broker. It's a broker, just like there's a cloud broker. You can cloud has its own broker, which what it does actually, this broker is actually making the connections and the conversions as necessary. So directly you're not before the broker will see who is contacting the cloud for what reasons. So if you are dealing with this kind of storage, this broker will manage connecting the two types of storages, right? Maybe it will use some kind of a different kind of a protocol. Just like we have HTTP protocol, it might use some other protocol. So in the same way, this device also would travel through the broker. into the cloud over here. So the broker is like your protective, just like we have an atmosphere around the earth. Oops. This fellow has to close. Something is open again. It is like the atmosphere around the earth, which protects you, not protects you. In this case, the broker is trying to make sure all the communication can still go on as necessary. All the conversion is done basically. So a data coming in some format, X over here may be converted into Y format for the desktop, and it may be converted into Z format for the mobile, and this storage may be using some protocol A or something. So you see that depending on what type of services is getting connected with the cloud, depending on what type of devices are getting connected, automatically the broker will look into adapting itself to the outside environment, okay, which is your outside the cloud environment. So we have something known as Bootstrap, right? That is one of the frameworks which we commonly see. This framework is essentially used for responsive design, right? So responsive design, what does this mean? It means I will design myself to fit your device. So if you're a desktop, I will fit myself. I will have all my JavaScript framework, HTML pages, everything created as per your desktop needs based on that resolution. If you are a mobile with this kind of network, I will respond in so and so fashion. So that's what a responsive design would mean, and Bootstraps helps you to do that. So in the same way, the broker might also be internally using these tools. It is we do not know what tool AWS uses, but somewhere down the line, all this conversion process is happening to deal with heterogeneous devices and services outside the cloud. So that is what it means, multi-device broker. A multi-device broker commonly exists as a gateway diagrams are also there. So it says, as we know, there are many types of devices that the cloud consumer works with on the internet. The cloud consumer may be using a laptop to access a cloud provider, a Mozilla Firefox browser, a smartphone or tablet, and even there are different variations in every type of device. When the cloud provider web portal interacts with the cloud consumer, the multi-device broker ensures that it can display the data as per the device of the cloud consumer. So why multi-device broker would be necessary? Because because one of the characteristics of cloud is what? It has to be ubiquitous. Ubiquitous means I will be available anywhere on any type of devices, and that's where multi-device broker will be used for to make ubiquitous computing possible. So here you see the multi-device broker is inside the cloud, which is like an interface before you reach the actual service. Depending on what devices are getting connected to it, it will produce the data automatically for the respective device. So that way the service does not have to worry about if I'm writing a Java program and if I'm saying print, that print, how it will print on desktop, how it will print on laptop, how it will print on mobile, how it will print on printer. That does not worry to me, because multi-device broker is going to take care of that. So how does multi-device broker, what are the types of gateways we have? So one is whatever data that comes through the cloud, you convert it into XML, right? XML is a very good format, or JSON is a very good format, so you can have a XML gateway, that any data that I'm sending across, I will send it as an XML. So cloud storage gateway transforms cloud storage protocols and encodes storage devices to facilitate data transfer and storage. So again, storage devices, there may be different type of storage devices, and depending on whether you're moving from a, let's say, a hard disk to a tape or something, some kind of a storage gateway you require. In fact, there is a service called storage gateway in AWS that is mainly used for hybrid cloud, hybrid cloud storage. So if you have something known as cloud bursting, we have explained what cloud bursting, right, means. In a private cloud, your storage is full and you want to expand it automatically. It has to burst into a public cloud. So this kind of gateway will be very useful for us. So locally in the private cloud, I might be using a server hard disk, but on the cloud, inside the cloud, I might be using a S3 bucket. So the storage types will be different. The protocols that will be used to communicate with the storage devices also might be different. But cloud storage gateway will ensure that it can switch between the protocols as per the cloud storage devices. So mobile device gateway transforms the communication protocols used by mobile devices into protocols that are compatible with cloud services. So mobile, all these devices, they may be using a different protocol, right? It is quite possible between the service and between the device. So the matching between creating a bridge between the two protocols is what this gateway will achieve. Mobile device gateway. So where the transformation is happening, where that bridge has been created, the bridge has been created at transport protocol level. So we have HTTP protocol, TCP the lower level we have transport protocol, network protocol, right? Then we have messaging protocols. So when we do a chatting, right? So chatting, we open a lot of sockets. Not everything works on HTTP all the time. We are giving a live connection. So HTTP is like the connection is only for short time, but a chatting might be having a live connection object available between the two TCP IP addresses for a longer time. So that's how your chat servers will work, right? Otherwise, if there are many many people chatting at the same time in different groups, each one of them are given a different connection, a live connection, so that it doesn't break. Then you have at the storage level, there will be some bridge created, and at the data level also some bridge is created in the form of XML gateway. So that was all about multi-device broker. So now we come to state management database. This is the last of the specialized cloud mechanisms. So before we speak about state management, so we have to understand what state is also, right? So state can be considered as so we say, what is how are you feeling today, right? So let's say I am feeling good. So you are in this state right now. So, but will you remain in this state now? No. After a few hours, I will say, how are you feeling? You will say, I am not feeling good today, or maybe I am not feeling good now. So the state is basically some kind of a data transformation. At one point, the program, is I'm going to, at one point, the value of some data. For example, what is the product price? This is, let's say, 12 rupees. And after some time, so this is a state. So after some time, I will ask you, what is the product price? Same question I will ask you, and you will say it is still 12. which means the state has not changed. But after some time, when I say what is the product price, the state will say, oh, it is 13 now. So the state has changed. So state is the value, that is associated at a particular time. So it is a value associated at a particular time. So in order to know, if when you're moving from one state to another state, from here to here to here, do you remember the state? It depends, right? Have you stored it in your, in your mind? Have you remembered that it was 12 rupees previous time? Have you remembered now that it was previous time 12 rupees? And have you remembered in the third case that it was, now it is 13 and previous time it was 12? So state, if you don't save the state, you will not remember the state. That is, if you do not save the state, you will not remember the state. And this scenario, so this scenario is called stateful, and this scenario is called stateless. So that is what state means. Okay, what state are you in? So this is so remember this examples. So now that we know what stateful and stateless means, or what a state and a stateless means, what is HTTP? HTTP is stateless. So what does it mean? So today, let's say you're doing a shopping over here, right? You're visiting a website and you said, I want to buy rice. So you click a button, right? Every time you do something on the page, you click a button. So you say buy or add to the shopping cart. The thing is, if HTTP is stateless, next time, so this page is, when you click on the add to cart button, what is happening actually? For that particular time, this state is passed to the server. Or maybe it is not passed. It depends on the application. So this is a web server, okay? So if the web server does not save the state, next time you click on the add to cart, because HTTP stateless means what? HTTP will forget you bought rice. So who has to remember? This fellow, web server has to remember that you bought rice. So he has to keep a record of all your data. Okay, you bought rice, right? Over here, he has to remember your state. So that next time, so this time he remembers the state. Before you click on your next time, you buy the second item, this fellow will send rice to the browser saying, please remember, this is what you did last time. But who is reminding the browser? It is not the browser page, it's the HTTP, right? HTTP, this one connection has gone in this direction. Right? So so this fellow is gone in this direction. After the buy rice information is gone to the web server, browser will forget whatever has been done. Unless the web server, now when it is coming back, it's saying, is responding, right? It works in a request and response. Before, when it responds, it will tell the browser, you had bought rice last time. So when you display the page now, make sure you display rice. Then second time, so he will display the rice, but he doesn't remember that he had, the page won't remember. Okay, remember this. Somebody has to remind the page all the time that you bought rice. After some time, somebody says buy sugar, add to the cart, and clicks a button. This time rice and sugar will go. This time, what will go? The rice and sugar will. Let me put direction. The bar, this time rice and sugar will go because both are displayed, right? And this fellow will save it over here as sugar. And again, the page will be reminded with a new state. So the thing is, the shopping cart state, somebody has to remember. Either you you can use JavaScript also locally. You can use JavaScript program to save the state between pages locally. This is also possible, but somebody other than the HTTP on the way will not remember it. Okay, somebody has to keep the state. Now the thing is, so this is how HTTP works, right? In the cloud scenario, we never deal with one web server, right? The architecture is little bit complex. We have load balancers also. So we have a load balancer, and your one website is hosted by 3 machines over here on the background. Right? It is the same website. So first time the load balancer comes, somebody said that I want to buy rice, so rice will go over here. So this fellow will say buy rice, and he will respond back buy rice. Second time when the request comes, it is quite possible that sugar has been bought. So this fellow goes over here. So let's assume that rice has not been informed. So buy sugar comes over here. And this fellow, when he goes back, he'll say sugar has been bought. So this fellow will say, so first fellow will say rice has been bought, the second fellow will say sugar has been bought. So what will be displayed? Basically whoever is responding, that fellow's information will be considered. So in load balancers, usually the way it works is, this can be a problem, right? So the thing is, if one person has bought rice, the second time also the load balancer load balancer will remember. So let us assume this is a browser on the right hand side, okay? This is a browser. Browser with IP address 172.10.1.0. The browser will remember that you had contacted me earlier, so next time he will contact this server number 1 only. Otherwise it will not make sense, right? So second time when we buy sugar, we also maintain it on the same server. So it will, so far everything is good, no issues. It works like the same thing. It not only load balances between the 3 servers, but it also makes sure it ties the server to the browser, the state, because we want to maintain the state. The thing is, what will happen if this machine goes down? What if the state is, there are some pieces of information, let's say some data is there, some data is stored over here on web server, some state will be saved on 1, 2, 3. How will all 3 be synchronized? In that case, we use a common storage area like a database in the back. So because all these 3, anyone can go down, and also the data, there may be scenarios where data may be remembered by different servers. Anything can happen on this front because because of the load balancing architecture. We create a database just like we create a common storage between 2 different hypervisors. We create a common database for storing the state itself. So everybody, whoever now it goes to, it doesn't matter. The load balancer also now can balance between the all the 3 servers, but the state is maintained in one place in the background. So where is the shopping cart saved now? In the database itself. So buy rice will come here, and Y sugar will come here. So next time this fellow browser comes in contact with the load balancer will not worry this time that this is this web server, second web server, third web server. It will simply give the request. What the web server will do, in order to remember the last state, it will contact the database, and that is what will be passed on to the browser. So this will be passed on to the browser. So this kind of database is called state management database. It is nothing but a database, but it is a database specialized to maintain states. The question is now, are we only talking about money browsers and servers over here? No, we are talking about everything. Data is everywhere, right? Data is inside the cloud, data is outside the cloud. Even inside the cloud, there are all services created, right? And they are all dependent on each other. There are services created, there are machines created. So let's say this is machines. Machines been created, there is storage created. There are all types of compute resources inside. There is all types of storage resources inside. There is all type of network resources inside, right? And there are all types of front ends and from the cloud outside the cloud, right? Even so, if you want to remember the state between this fellow and this fellow working together, if they all also want to talk to each other, they all have to cloud. How will cloud manage so many services? How will cloud remember that these services are connected to each other, the networks are connected to each other, the storages are connected to each other? There is all that has to be maintained in a separate database, and that database is again called state management database. Only when you remember what was the state last time, you will be able to reinitialize. In case something goes wrong, you will be able to reinitialize it using the state management database. And so state management database is also a specialized mechanism without which it will be difficult to coordinate or recreate the environments that we want. Okay, so that is what this the state management database mechanism is all about. It is a simple thing, but one of the important things. So that is all, I think. Yeah, so we have completed all the cloud specialized mechanisms. So we covered hypervisor today, resource cluster, right? Hypervisors, we studied about how hypervisors manage virtual machines and how VIM manages hypervisors. We saw into resource clustering, right? We saw three types of clustering, right? Server cluster, then data cluster and database cluster. Then we saw multi-device broker, which is like a interface between all types of devices outside the cloud, which interacts with the cloud. And then we saw finally state management database. So so this is actually all unit 2, you can say. Cloud security was a part of unit 1. So we completed cloud security, cloud infrastructure mechanism, and specialized cloud mechanism. So now we are left with last 4 mechanisms, which is cloud management mechanisms. So when we talk about cloud management mechanism, think of it like a software. Like think of it like a website. Through this website, I'm able to, let's say you are going to Amazon.com to purchase something, right? You get or Flipkart.com. What is that software? That software is ultimately a management software, right? It is what it is managing. It is managing your shopping needs. In the same way, all these systems, sometimes it is not only a website, but it can be a back-end system managing everything, right? So in some cases there may be a front end, in some cases there may be everything is managed in the back end. So but it is like an interface, you can definitely say, to all the mechanism. If you want to manage any of the other mechanisms, you have to go through the cloud management mechanisms. So a cloud management mechanisms are techniques that let you do management tasks such as, so what are the management tasks we're looking at? We're looking at setting up something, configuring, maintaining, monitoring a cloud resources, like you are creating a machine, starting a machine, stopping a machine, deleting a machine, right? Or creating a database, or creating a storage for yourself, increasing the storage, decreasing the storage. So all that can be, you can instruct the cloud that I want to do this thing through a management mechanism. So it will. So usually this task will be exposed as an API. So API is nothing but something like a REST service function, which you can call when you want to do a particular task. And inside that function, you will have the logic to do the specific things. So we are looking at 4 types of systems. 4 types of management you can say that is happening. One is remote management, remote administration system. Anything that you want to do on the cloud, you should be able to do from your box. That is called remote. So how you are doing that? You can do this if cloud has exposed a website, right? Or there is a portal, web portal through which you can do. Or maybe there is a command line interface, or maybe there is a SDK support given by cloud, where you can inside from your Python program you can connect to AWS. All these facilities have to be given to whoever is using the cloud, so that they can remotely manage. So that is all about remote administration system. Resource management system is basically focused on managing resources, right? So we heard about VIM, right? Virtual Infrastructure Management. So that is a resource management system, VIM. So what is VIM doing? It is managing your resource, which is an infrastructure level resource, something like hypervisors. Hypervisor also you can say it is a resource management system which is managing virtual machines. So all these resource management systems are also a very important piece of the cloud. Without having a resource management system in place, you cannot do remote administration, right? If you want to remote administration, you can say start a machine, but ultimately who's going to start the machine? The resource management system. The resource management system will ultimately take over and they say, oh, you want me to start a machine, I will do it for you. And so so all these are interfaces, but one interface is also connected to the other interfaces. Your remote administration system is like your main door, through which everyone comes, all the normal public comes. And behind the scene, there is a resource management system. Behind the scene also your billing management system and SLA management system is there, which manages your SLAs and billing management. Right, so if somebody says I want to buy some, I want to create a free tier account, I want to get an enterprise plan, everything is been billed, right? So how the billing will happen, that information will be there with the billing management system. So the remote administration system will contact the billing software saying, okay, please tell me what is the price for this service, please give me the bill of this, please give me a report of this for this particular customer. So the remote administration system is like a big door to all the other doors, So SLA management system. So SLA management system is you promised an agreement with the customer that the machine that they have taken will be available 99% of the time. The infrastructure will be there. If so that has to be tracked. And how do we track? We use SLA monitors, right? That is a mechanism internally we will be using to track the SLA. So same way we will be having pay per use monitor, right? We have seen that pay per use monitor mechanism. So here you see there is on the left hand side there is a browser, on the right hand side there is something like a cloud. It's a on the left hand side there is something similar to AWS management console, through which you are logging in and you are requesting for service. So this example is an example of remote administration system. Now AWS management console is for the normal customers, but what if somebody inside the cloud who is an employee of the cloud, who wants to see what all you have used, what all services these 10 customers have used, what are the bills they have been produced, how do they verify? They don't have to log in through the same website, right? They will have their own internal website to look into all that data. So remote administration sometimes is it depends on for whom it is also. Is it for the normal cloud consumer, or is it for an AWS employee who's trying to look at the data of all the consumers? So they may have two different portals to manage the same set of resources. So here I told you the cloud consumer is on the left hand side, but this cloud consumer can be your normal public person in the public like us, or it can be an AWS employee. So this both of them will have their own portals too, and this portals has been exposed by whom? By remote administration system, which is like a main door to all the three systems. So if you want to know the billing, it will contact billing management system. If you want to know whether SLAs have been met, it will contact SLA management system. If you want to do anything with any resource, anything inside the cloud, whether you want storage or whether you want computer, or whether you want to have a particular platform, you have to go through the resource management system. So as I told you, there are two types of portals, right? One is self-service portal. This is used by a normal public, but usage and administration portal is for the AWS employee type of person, or maybe an administrator of your company. You give him special access to administer everything in the behind the scenes. So that you can see there are 15,000 employees inside this, and this kind you have to create a report on which all services are used by whom and who has been billed what. So ultimately administration has to be done at a very high level when there are a lot of people using the same service under one umbrella. So usage and administration portal is not only for AWS employee, but it may mean also for an administrator. So administrator's dashboard will be different from a self-service portal, which is for a normal consumer. So self-service portal is what I can see only what I am using, but a usage and administration portal can see what is everybody else is doing under my umbrella. So what type of tasks the remote administration system can do? It can configure and set up a cloud service for you. It can provide and release resources on demand. It can monitor for you, what is the status of the service, is it running, how much have you used, is it running fine, what is the performance of it, are we meeting the, your quality of service metrics, which is part of your SLA, it manages your cost, leasing cost and usage, right? You have taken a particular plan, and that it is trying to manage your plan also, a billing plan, managing user accounts, security credentials, right? Who is able to log in into what? Ultimately, it's like a big door to do everything, right? So as I give you an example, that VIM is also like a resource management system. So if any virtual machines have to be created, all the VIM plays around with virtual machine image files, right, which is stored as a repository in the storage. So unless this virtual VIM does not have access to virtual machine images, it will not be able to play around with different hypervisors. So here it says, since VIM is a cloud provider task, now VIM definitely people like me who are normal, people, customers, we won't have access to VIM. It is an internal software, and I clearly said that some portals are available internally for the AWS employee. So an AWS employee will definitely have access to VIMs if they want to, do something with the VMs, in the sense, in response to the problem that you're facing, it can internally have its own system native console, means like a own website or a own portal inside to manage and administer the resources even at the infrastructure level. But we cannot manage everything at the hypervisor level. We don't have that control. Maximum we have control over creating machines. We don't have control over hypervisors. So hypervisors of VIM, that has to be that is internal to the cloud provider, and that they manage through their own software, which is you can say it is native. Native means it is close to my existence. I am from my native place. So and so. So I'm close to my native. So in the same way, these softwares are native to cloud providers. So what does a SLA manager manages? SLA manager would be having, just like your VIM is managing virtual machine image repository, which is a set of all virtual machine image files. The SLA will have quality of service metrics, right? It's a repository. So quality of service metrics could be something like if you're having a car, and so the car who provides you or who manufactures a car, he will give you a metric that this car will give you 80 kilometers per hour. That is a quality of service metrics. So somebody has to manage all these numbers, and who is doing that? SLA manager. And what is one of the mechanisms that is used? SLA manager will definitely use a SLA monitor. We have done that mechanism in one of the previous slides. So here you see an example. A cloud service consumer is coming here, and there is a SLA monitor agent. We have already done this, right? This SLA monitor agent will be what it is trying to monitor, whether my car is giving 80 kilometers per hour. And how does it know whether it is 80 or 90 that we have to look out for? It is the quality of service metrics. And who has created this quality of service metrics for this particular customer? This SLA manager. And who has told the SLA manager? The remote administration system. The remote administration, who has told? Maybe the cloud resource administrator or the cloud provider, your cloud consumer. So remember, the cloud consumer can access the remote administration system through the management console. So all these pieces are working together to provide you the SLA. So then you have a billing management system. So billing management system, it has a pricing and a contract manager. Just as we have the virtual infrastructure manager, we have a SLA manager, we have a pricing and contract manager also. What it is doing, it has pay-per-use measurements. How much should I charge this customer? So this customer would have been said, for 750 hours it is free. After that it is charged. If it is X service, which is Y service, then the charge is this. All that metrics has to be stored in the database, right, for pricing and control contract manager to manage the billing for each consumer, and it is part of the billing management system. So what type of billing you have, all that will be created for your billing agreement will be created and stored in this database, and this is what the pricing and contract manager will make sure that it follows this charges to charge you, depending on how you are using the cloud. So it's a similar kind of diagram again. Instead of a SLA manager, we are having a pricing and control manager over here, which is having his own database where all your billing information is there. So whenever the clouds you are using pay-per-use monitor agent has been used, just like your SLA monitor is used here. In this case, pay-per-use monitor is used, and every time you're using an entry will be put up in a database which is managed by pricing and control manager, and every time a bill is required for you, it will be given by pricing and control manager through this remote administration system, invoice can be generated and given to the cloud resource administrator or a cloud consumer. So paper uses you pay only for how much you use, or different type of pricing models are there in the market, right? It can be flat rate or paper allocation or whatever. So mainly for cloud we have never seen anything beyond paper use. Flat rates, we do see flat rates in some cases where we get discounted rates. So if you book a machine in advance, without creating it, without starting it, then some flat rate might be applied to you. But flat rates are hardly used in cloud environment. It is pay per use model mostly. Then in cloud we may have prepaid and postpaid, right? Just like in phones. But in cloud we never see prepaid payments. We always see postpaid payments. That is, you will be charged as per use, and you'll be a bill is generated at a particular time, maybe at the end of the month or something, and then you make a post payment. So prepayment is cloud has not gone to that far where you can arrange prepayments. Maybe in future you will have prepaids. So with that we have also finished all the four cloud management mechanisms. It is very straightforward. So remote administration system, resource management system, SLA management system, and billing management system. So in unit 4 you have all these architectures, okay, you finished all the mechanisms, but now you want to understand the architecture. So there are different architectures you use, like say 3-tier architecture is like one of the clients of architecture used to build software. But in cloud what all architectures are used, that is what it is all about. And we have already studied about hypervisor clustering, right? We can cluster that, so that is one type of architecture you can say. We have already seen in workload distribution architecture where your load balancer was used, right? The load balancer was used to balance the load. We have also seen it scaling, auto scaling. So these are different architectures. How do you replicate storage, redundant storage? We have seen an example of that. And cloud bursting architecture, we have also we explained, right, in hybrid cloud how we are extending the private cloud into public cloud. So that is all. Unit 3 you have this 18 type of cloud computing architectures. So the point is, what I am trying to make is all these presentations are there over here. And where is unit 4? Is part 1. Syllabus. So that was your unit 1, right? Cloud reference architectures and standards, security, right? We covered all the so you see threat agents, security threat, etc. All the cloud security mechanisms. Then we moved with cloud computing mechanisms, where we covered all these mechanisms, right? Unit 2. So that is what we finished today. And then what I explained you right now a little bit into unit 3 was all this, and the presentations for this are available. And this is unit 4, working with cloud. For these presentations are not there, but I think somewhere, I don't know how, I've mentioned it somewhere. So the textbooks are also available in case so it says Thomas Salt textbooks and everything, and cloud security comprehensive guide. So these are the textbooks. So this will contain this is advanced. This is unit 3. Yeah. So unit 4, even notes are not there actually. Usually these are the notes which, this is the first round, first time when I look at the subject I prepare the notes first, not even the presentation. Second round I prepare the presentations. But the textbooks, that should have those topics what we are talking about. Okay.